Hello and welcome back. I am Damien with Project Omnia, and today I am here with the first of a brand new video format that I really hope you are all going to like. So this new format, it's going to be kind of like a roundtable forum discussion type deal where I do an initial video where I give my opinion and perspective on a particular topic and then wait for feedback for a certain amount of time before I then make a follow-up video responding to all of that. And then we just kind of do that for each topic until each topic is thoroughly discussed. And today's topic is going to be authorial intent and compared to reader or viewer interpretation. Now, I'll mostly be coming at this from a viewer perspective because even for manga, which I do read some manga, I prefer the anime medium, so I do a lot more watching than I do reading. But for the sake of this video, I'm just real quickly going to kind of define authorial intent. And authorial intent is basically just the intent of the author that they're trying to get through their characters, their world, the overarching plot, all that stuff, right? Some authors are very intentional in what they're trying to do and what they're trying to tell the reader or viewer, and then some not so much. Some are just kind of going. But that's what we're going to be discussing today. And so first, I'm going to start with
Full Metal Alchemist.
This is a situation where I watched the anime, I have not read the manga, but the mangaka is Hiromu Arakawa. Sorry if I butchered her name, but most people know her. If you don't, excellent. And as far as I'm aware, she actually has something new for the series coming out soon, which everyone's really excited about. But what I'm going to use for authorial intent for her is one of the most famous things about the Full Metal Alchemist series that has led to much trauma for many of its readers and viewers, and that is Shao Tucker. And here's where I feel a lot of readers and viewers didn't necessarily take the intent she was trying to portray with that as it was meant to be taken. And this is mostly based upon, discussions I've had with other people about this episode, or these, for the people that read the manga, the chapters, or through reaction videos, which if you followed me before, not only have I created some, but I'm just a big fan of reaction. But very quickly, Shao Tucker points out once Ed figures out that he has transmuted Nina and Alexander into a chimera, is that Ed and Al, really, they're not much different than Shao Tucker. And so, to me, that was very intentional. And she was definitely trying to get that into your head through the characters. And even through the act of, Ed's vehement refusal and lashing out at Shao when he makes this suggestion to him only further fuels the fact that, there is a grain of truth there. So first, I'm going to start with the similarities of these acts. So on the most base level, here are the things that make their act extremely similar and basically the same. So no matter what, both motives were inherently selfish. Now, how selfish each one was, or which one was worse in terms of degree of selfishness, that can be argued, and that's not what this video is about. But in general, Shao Tucker was doing it to keep his state certification, which is of course inherently selfish, and the boys in trying to bring back their mother. And now they were selfish in the fact that they needed their mom from an emotional standpoint, but it's still selfish act. Their mother had lived her life, and while it did come to an abrupt end that really was not beneficial for them it is what it is, and you can't really mess with that. That's even just a basic tenet of alchemy, right? So the next thing is it comes into that about taking life into their own hands. Now with Tucker, the thing is, this is where differences come in. With Tucker, he was actually taking lives that were still, alive, they still existed in this world, and manipulating them for his own purposes. Whereas Ed and Al, while it was still wrong to try to bring their mother back, their mother was already gone. So it's not as if they necessarily hurt anyone or even hurt like another soul through their actions other than their own. So they got hit with the brunt of their consequences in comparison to Tucker, who Nina and Alexander really got hit with the crux of his selfishness, right? So that was the big deal when it came to that. And so that's really the main difference, is again the fact that Tucker was taking lives that feel part of this world, whereas the brothers were trying to bring back a life that was no longer part of this world. But in the end, both were wrong, and that's why both were punished, albeit in different ways, for those acts. And so my conclusion from this is that it was Hiromu Arakawa, her intention to make the reader and the viewer through the anime really have to accept this uncomfortable fact. While they're not the exact same, this isn't apples to apples like I've alluded to, there is a base here where Ed Now's actions and Shao Tucker's actions overlap and are the same exact thing. There is that connection. And I think a lot of people missed it or just didn't want to accept that that was the case. So that is example number one. And then example number two, this is more dual in how it's presented. You get some exposition and stuff that backs up the authorial intent of what I'm about to talk about. And then you get more ambiguous. They show you through actions, and the viewer in this case really has to come to a lot of these conclusions through a combination of exposition given and then actions taken by the character. And that example is from my favorite all-time series, Cowboy Bebop. And I'm going to use Faye Valentine's character arc from beginning to when we are introduced to her until the end as my example for what I'm talking about. So I'm actually going to start out with information we get well after we are introduced to the character, because chronologically these events took place before then. But the start of her character's journey is really, she was on a trip with her parent in the early days of like kind of space exploration for the public, although she was definitely with a more well-off to-do rich family when she had her parents on Earth. And there was an accident that almost killed her and did kill her parent, and she was cryogenically frozen. And then about a little over a half century later, she was unfrozen and was saddled with an insane amount of debt. Through that, she meets a guy who in the end was manipulating her and trying to use her for his own purposes, which she of course comes to find out after he plays off this self-sacrificing deal that you later hysterically find out wasn't even true. He didn't even die. And then she gets mounted with his debt on top of the debt she already had, and so she runs away. And from that moment on is where you get the Faye that we see throughout the majority of the series, the one that is a manipulator and a user, and like she really uses her femininity as a weapon. And really it's just about how can she use others and even her circumstances and such. What can she use and how can she use it to get to her own ends, right? So this is how ultimately she ends up meeting the Bebop crew and, travels with them through space collecting bounties. So because of her nature, she's always gambling and stuff, and it's not as if throughout the series that the crew is earning a lot of money through the whole time, and she only gets a share of what they earn, and so she's always squandering it. But a big thing for her is, of course, the whole time she's actually bonding with the Bebop crew, and she won't really come to realize that until much later in the series. But I mean, it's just naturally going to happen when you're consistently around a group of people and you're involved in the types of situations they are, where life and death is often a thing, and all that good stuff. And so this also comes from a place of her character, very much, to put it simply, to boil it down to its most basics, she has a strong sense of wanting to belong, wanting to have, people to call her own. And ultimately, she does get that through the Bebop crew. There's episode 18, which is one of my favorite episodes, where they get sent first a tape of Faye and eventually a beta player that can play the tape, where you get the video time capsule of herself before the gate accident. Sorry, not the gate accident, but before the space exploration accident she was involved in. And it's her younger self basically cheering on her future self. And it's really sad because she can't remember that person that she was. And she doesn't remember any of those events at the time. And that's just the thing she wants most. And so it can very easily, like, it's really heart-wrenching. And then shortly after that, the next major thing we get from her is actually for episode 24, and that's when she kind of forces the Bebop to go to Earth. He goes with Ed, and Ed's supposed to show her this waterfall, which she is certain is connected to, you know, like where she lived and such, and, you know, maybe she'll find answers there and she'll finally have a place to belong. And of course, she does later in that episode get her memories back in a shower scene, and then she leaves the Bebop at the time and just run towards her childhood home, only to find that, of course, it's no longer standing, it's gone. And I mean, everything on the property is in disarray, and she goes to where her room used to be and draws like a little rectangle in the ground that's supposed to act as a bed, and just lays there staring up at the sky. And this is where I feel you're supposed to kind of get that she starts to come to terms with who she is now, and that is, she does finally accept the fact that she has had a place all along, and that is the Bebop, and with Jet and Spike and Ed and Ein, and that is her home now, and those are her people, those are her family, those are her loved ones. But of course, she doesn't realize this until after the fact, and the Bebop has already left. Ed and Ein left the ship, so it's just Jet and Spike, like when we first started the series. And then she does eventually return, and in the process she ran into Julia before she returned, so she gets to learn a little bit more about Spike, and this is where you can get like a connection between Faye and Spike. So she gets back to the Bebop and has information to give Spike about Julia, and she does it, but since she now understands that the Bebop has kind of been her place to belong this whole time, she doesn't really want Spike to go, because it would mean losing someone that matters to her again, which she doesn't want to do again. She didn't want to have to keep starting over. And now that she finally feels like she has a place to belong and people that are her own, she definitely doesn't want to lose them. But she also understands Spike's perspective of having to go through with this and face his past, even if it means that he might die because of it. And that's where you get that amazing scene where she really tepidly tries to stop Spike from leaving the Bebop by confessing all that to Spike. And then you get a great speech from Spike about, you know, his eyes, how one can only see the past, and one was always looking into the future, but never really being in the present, because he was always torn between those 2 points in time, which are never, those aren't the present. And so Faye's character arc, to me, going through all that, I mean, like I said, it really comes down to having a sense of belonging and feeling like you do have people around you that you care and love, and that you have a place to call home, and that you don't want to lose those things. It can be very scary when your home changes, be it the actual environment itself or the people in it. We don't generally like those changes because they're very scary. It's very unknown. And she's already been through that, and she went so long basically trying to find herself because of that, that now the thought of losing Spike or Jet or anyone else is really just not things she wants to accept. So, like I said, there's a lot with her character arc that you're supposed to infer. You're given very little through, like, exposition per se. Like, you know her first name actually is Faye, but Valentine is just a last name that was given to her. But, I mean, a lot of this stuff, it's just shown, and then you might get some like an internal monologue from her that helps you contextualize what you're being shown, but that's really it. And like her backstory that I started with, that's probably the most exposition you're given about her character. Everything else, like how she carries herself and what she presents to the world, like you have to observe that and come to that conclusion yourself. So it's much more ambiguous and open-ended, but it's still there, and you can still say the intent was put there by Watanabe and Nobumoto, who Watanabe was the series director and Nobumoto was the actual like script writer for the series. So between those two, they were the ones really kind of pushing, okay, this is narratively what we're trying to do, and I really feel like that intent was there for Faye's character, and that her and Spike were meant to connect in that way by the series end. But I've rambled long enough, and now I'm going to, as I said early on in the video, leave it to you guys. I want to know your thought about what I've spoken about here. Not just about the particular examples I gave, but about authorial intent versus reader-viewer interpretation. Like, do you try to interpret the author's intent? Does it not matter to you? You know, like I said, let me know down below in the comments, and then when I've got enough to kind of come back to it, I will do another video where I address all the comments. But that is going to be it for today. Thank you all for coming by, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.